you calling? What's up with that?
I'm not sure what's up with that, but you're here now. That's the important thing. I'm going to turn you up a little bit
That
and
is.
Good to have you here, Scott.
okay, you pirates.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get right to the crux of things with how did you two meet each other? So we already have Paul on as a guest as a grower. He's done time for it. Scott also spent time in the Crowbar Motel. Tell us all about it. How did you get into the game, and then how did you get arrested?
Well, heck, you know, like I said to Paul before we reconnected here, we should really stick to things that the statute of limitations has run out on.
Oh,
But
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, give you a brief overview. We had a mutual friend years ago who knew us both, and both had this predilection for testing boundaries and smoking big fat joints. And he thought we should meet, so we did, and we became fast friends. I was just fascinated by Paul and his boundless wisdom and his capacity to roll the biggest joints I've ever seen.
Thank you. God, I'm so.
Uno más gasolino, por favor.
Uno más gasolino, por favor. Sí.
That's amazing. So he rolled big joints. How many papers would you use?
Oh, sometimes two, but
All of them?
yeah, all of them.
I think all of them.
Scott lived about 4 blocks from me, and he was the first computer kind of geek person I ever met because he was selling computers and
When was that? When were you selling computers, Scott?
Oh, that was in the early 80s, probably 8. That was back when Apple, from the Lisa to the Macintosh.
Oh, right.
That dates me a little bit. Yeah, that was a megabyte. A megabyte of RAM was like $1,600.
a phone doesn't even come close to that.
$200. That's incredible. Wow. So you partook on a recreational basis, just like a lot of people do. Is that it?
Yeah, and there was a lot of music involved. Like Scott and I would listen to music, and a band that I was managing, the bass player lived at Scott's, right?
Oh, okay. What band was that? Can we say?
A band called Nightfall, who these guys were destined to be the next White Lion or something like that. But they were such a bunch of knuckleheads.
So you were managing them,
Yes.
and we don't have them now. So
I was managing hair bands.
No,
Right
but
now
the
I'm trying to
lead
manage the
singer
hairline.
is in a
And
band
then,
called
yeah,
Steel Panther now.
hang on a sec, Scott. Hang on. Go ahead. What's the name of the band again? Sorry.
Steel Panther.
Steel Panther. Oh man, that's the best.
Have you seen any of that, Scott?
I have. I've recently actually reconnected with Ralph.
And so these guys all got high. Is that it?
Well, they were all kind of stupid, basically, but talented. I got to the point where I decided musicians were mentally retarded by choice.
Oh.
And these guys were the classic example of it.
And we're off the air.
Yeah.
Anyways, though. Oh well.
Just to give a little context to this, do you remember in the studio, at Paul Warroff's studio in Vista, when they were doing their demo, and they were playing the game Dirt Mouse?
Dirt Mouse. That sounds potentially horrible.
Dirt Mouse.
What goes on there?
I kind
Well,
of
that's
forgotten the
one
story,
guy
but it's
stands
making
facing
some
the other
creepy
guy and
vibrations
opens
up my
his
back.
mouth, and the other guy throws a dirt clod in it.
Throw a dirt clod in a fella's mouth. Dirt mouth. I thought you said
Right.
dirt mouse. It's
So what
dirt
happens
mouth.
if you miss? What happens if you miss?
Yeah, well, it goes
Well,
in
you
their
hit 'em in the
face.
Face with the dirt clod. You're right. But I watched this game go on for hours. They were having fun.
These guys were knuckleheads, anyways. But so Scott and I met that way. But one of the pivotal points in Scott's and mine's relationship to cannabis was he came up with this strain called hash plant number 6.
Oh, that sounds good.
And this plant made me a legend in Hollywood.
Is that right?
This was the plant that he got this from a friend of his who was growing it in a closet. And it had come from the Sacred Sativa Seed Club in Amsterdam.
Wow.
And they had gotten bought up by the Sensi Seed Bank, and the strain kind of disappeared, and we got it as a cutting. And Scott gave it to me, and what we had that for 15 years was just a cutting. Was that it, Scott?
Oh God, yeah. Even longer. I'm Mendocino. I probably had it for 22 years or something.
Wow.
That's unbelievable, Scott. You're give us a brief rundown on your tech. You live in a bizarre area, and there's only satellite, and it's crackling, and it's not always controllable, and you can't always be online, and your phone doesn't always work. Is that right?
Well, that's the reason why a soup can and a string right now, Alan. That's it's much more reliable and better fidelity.
Well, I hope it's not Campbell's.
But yeah, we're in the west coast of California and the north. We're probably as far west as you can get on the continent right here in Mendocino. But we're the forgotten land, proud but forgotten.
They don't care about you too much tech-wise. They haven't set up a lot of lovely towers, and maybe you're going to be in the 5G pool. Who knows? But okay, so let's move along to the area of time where both of you guys, started down your path towards incarceration, and of course leave out anything that the statute of limitations would be a problem for you. Let's hear a bit about that.
Gee.
Well, the timeline kind of goes like this. We were buddies. We were smoking buddies, and like you said, I had a little bit of a tech background, so he was launching helping to launch the club post Nucular. If that doesn't ring a bell for you.
What's it called again? Sorry.
And
Club Post Nucular.
Nuclear. Yes.
And I was the manager of the club, and it was a $3 million nightclub in Laguna Beach.
Oh, wow.
Owned by this Chinese guy who owned a bunch of hospitals. But he had the Morpheus Design Studio in New York design the place.
Oh, okay.
And it was spectacular. I mean, it was had a floating aluminum dance floor, and
wow.
And
I don't even know what that means.
Well, it was floating on rubber.
Oh, I see.
John Mayer sound system too.
I'm sorry. Let's go again, Scott.
Oh, it didn't have it had the sound system too, right? It had the top of the line, most amazing sound system I'd ever heard.
Oh, wow.
Meyer sound system.
Nice.
Same thing the Grateful Dead and Pavarotti used, right?
Wow.
Sting.
I didn't know that Pavarotti toured with the Grateful Dead, but I'm sorry I missed that.
Same sound system.
Oh, I see. Okay. I would have enjoyed that.
Would have been
mix.
something.
Yeah.
Pavarotti and the Dead.
Yeah. Put it together. See the ideas you come up with. So then you're at this sound system, fantastic, wonderful club, right, with a floating dance floor. And that's when you started to get into the ideas of growing and cultivating?
Well, no, we were that idea. Actually, when I was about 12 years old, my mom came into my bedroom one night and said, "What is that glow coming from your desk?" And of course, I didn't notice the glow coming from my desk. What glow? What desk glow? What are you talking about, Mom? You got to leave now. And she pulled the drawer open, and there were 6 little plants in there. And that was the beginning for me. Paul and I, when we met, that was dynamite meets the match. It was that I realized that for years, not necessarily Paul and I, but independently, messing around for years. But when we met, I think there was a synergy that we were both just fascinated with the plants. We were fascinated with people that were fascinated with the plants, and frankly, it was inevitable. It just took a few years for us to meet.
It was a cultural thing too, because we both liked the Grateful Dead, and so we would go to those kind of events together, and we had our extended family. And when Scott got in trouble, I remember taking him up to Mendocino.
Right.
And introducing him to some friends of mine up there, because it was clear that Scott had to get out of Orange County. Like it was like
That must be bizarre.
because
gotta
Laguna
get out.
Beach was such a small place that once the cops knew about you, you were fucked basically, right? And so I remember taking him up there, and he bought his first piece of land. And
How large a chunk was that?
wait, you got a 40-acre piece up in Comchi, didn't you?
I was 10. It was 10 acres.
10.
10 acres with, yeah, it was, Clayton Roberts said to say hello. I just ran into him from the other day.
Clayton, what a wonderful
He's actually
human.
watching this podcast right now.
Hey, Clayton, how are you? Listen, I'm trying to go in sort of consecutive order to keep things together, but we do have a listener right now with a question from Papaji, and I'm just going to jump right into it. It's a cultivational-based question, so we're kind of skipping forward in time to your current state of knowledge as opposed to your long-haired Eagles, Grateful Dead listening music days. This is from Papa G Grows. Papa G Grows. He's on YouTube. He says, "Can you at germination?" And you probably have to explain what that might be to the non-growers, because let's also remember that this show is designed to help people understand how to not know anything about this and get to the place where they can actually grow. So we'll go back in time a little bit and get to that. But this guy says, "Can you at germination influence the plant's sex using photoperiod? It's said that long days, 20 hours or so, will yield males, and greater than 14 hours will yield, is that what it means? Less than 14 hours will yield females. Second from the audience is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just say that, can you at germination influence the plant's sex using photoperiod if you go a certain amount of hours? Is that possible?
No.
Okay.
That's genetic predisposition. You can't really influence the sex of the plant without using some pretty harsh chemicals that can suppress the females. But virtually all cannabis is female dominant. It only takes to pollinate billions of females.
Right. And the male plants.
Cannabis.
Oh shoot, we've lost him. All right, I thought that might happen. I'm going to give him a call back, but
I'll address that question.
Yeah, Paul, you picked that up.
Yeah. A seed has a genetic predisposition, and based on stresses in the environment, could possibly, under negative circumstances, alter its genetics or slip into a hermaphroditic state because of environmental stresses. But normally a plant does not change its sexual orientation unless it's stressed. And it's basically a strategy for seed survival. The whole motivation of the plant is to make seed, right?
Right. That's amazing. So you're back with us
Although
now.
I do have, I have a female plant right now, and we're talking about it, and we're all fine with that. But it's just the way it works.
Okay, another quick one from the audience: grow with live soil and Korean natural farming for that special love effect. Do you know what that means? Korean style natural farming using live soil. Isn't all soil live? Isn't that the idea?
Not all soil is live.
Should be, though.
A lot of it's been killed by chemicals, right? So that's what Scott specializes in, is making live soil. Right?
Okay.
Talk about that, Scotty.
Let's hear about live soil then, because this is great stuff. I have not heard of this.
The Korean natural farming method is it's the one straw revolution. So it's there's a wonderful philosophy, which essentially is that plants want to live, and mostly humans get in the way of that desire. So do less, get more. And plants' genetic expression, their full genetic potential will be expressed if a human can stay out of the way.
I see. This is incredible. And you have to keep on top of so many things such as this when you're growing, especially a large crop, right? If you have mites or some kind of problem, you have to.
Well, here's the thing with organic: when you're outside growing, mites are never a problem. I mean, that is a problem of indoor growing, because you got to look at plants have an open immune system, right? Our immune system is closed because it's confined by skin.
Inside the body, okay, right.
Their immune system is outside of them. So everything in the environment affects how they react to the environment. Where their real health comes from is the biodiversity in the soil and the health of the soil. That is their functional immune system. Everything else is attacking it, right?
Wow.
So when you have a healthy soil like Scott manufactures, the plant has all the benefits of a healthy immune system right out the gate. Right?
Okay.
And when you're outside, you're not concentrating that immune system. That is, you've created an enclosed system for something that lives in an open system, right?
Right.
So when you enclose it, you concentrate all those problems into a confined area.
Okay. And so not the boll weevil or something like that outdoors?
It could be anything, and the thing that causes the greatest problem there is lack of diversity in what you're growing. Whenever you monocrop something and an insect decides that it likes that, that's when you have a big problem, and they end up using pesticides.
So take us through, you guys, and we'll sort of lean heavier on Paul because he's here. And we're having this bizarre satellite kind of sound happening in the background. But when you, Scott, how do I say this? I don't know how to grow. So basically, if you can put it into a WikiHow and understand and get it across, like what are the essentials that people? Because I've always said people should grow their own, and regardless of any kind of governmental limit or what have you. You have one plant, you have 10 plants. Whatever you're going to do, you need to take the same care with what you're doing, I suppose. So what is the best way to do it? I mean, you just take a plant, take the soil and stick a seed into it and water it, and that's it? I mean, there's a lot of other things that folks need to know, correct?
Well, that's and also simplicity. That's it, right there. You take a plant, you take a seed, you put it in the ground, and the plant grows. I got some pictures that I think I sent over yesterday of plants growing out of my compost pile. The biggest plant that I grew last year, I never want to grow. If you're going to try to do it it's far easier to do it in nature than it is to do it out of nature, and that's where I think humans run into problems. Is we've taken the plant and we've kind of taken it out of its nature, and we are trying to recreate a natural environment. Well, some of us are. Some of us are trying to create an absolutely hyper sterile environment. When you look at more of the indoor grows, you're looking more of like a pharmaceutical product rather than a plant or a food. You got to really pay attention to staying within the comfort zone of the plant, and then the plant's going to do what the plant should do. But kind of running back to when we were talking about that soil biological diversity, in a tablespoon of soil, there's about 1 billion different microorganisms. And many of those microorganisms are responsible for what we call drugs today. A lot of antibiotics were actually isolated from soil, naturally occurring soil biology. And they take those into the lab, they grow them out under sterile conditions, and then they react them with things like nitric acid, and they make things like tetracycline. So we are not creating nature. We're really living with it and trying to harness some of that energy. And to even go back another giant step, something that you guys were talking about, not the hobnail boot. I'm trying to, just so people don't get flustered by my accent. What you guys were talking about earlier, we're talking about this really interesting, I would call it the path to wisdom. And we have this information, we have knowledge, and then we have wisdom. And I think humans get stuck with information, which is the internet, is what's really, the internet provides lots of information. And then you take the information and you put it to work for you. And through a little bit of trial and error, you get knowledge. And then once that knowledge is perfected, you have wisdom. But if you get stuck in any of those first steps, it's a kind of a phase-locked loop where you never really break out. And you got to kind of open your mind and allow wisdom to occur. Just like anything, the harder you try, the worse it is.
Right.
So experiential knowledge leads to wisdom.
Absolutely.
Grow.
Absolutely.
Like when you plant your first one and you're going to screw it up, right? There's going to be a problem, and you'll go, oh, next time I'll have to compensate vis-a-vis this.
There's always going to be errors in the process, and one of the things that I always stress to people is every plant you learn how to grow teaches you something. Or a mushroom or whatever it is, right? And I'm not just talking about kinds of cannabis. I'm talking about vegetables and herbs and lettuce and squashes. All these things give us a degree of knowledge that we wouldn't normally get going to a supermarket, right? So we get this emotional bond to our food, to our medicines, to all these kind of things, and gaining that knowledge and participating in it with plants is one of the greatest spiritual things we can do for ourselves, because it gives us a connection to our environment that is outside the brain. It's not an intellectual thing, it's a physical, tactile thing. That action of growing a seed. I'll give you a classic example. When I first came back to Ontario, I ran a place called Puck's Farm. Puck's Farm.
Okay.
And it was a petting zoo farm for school kids from Toronto.
Okay.
In Schaumburg, right?
Yeah.
And so, 4 school buses full of kids would show up at this place every day all spring long. And they would get to plant a garden.
Yeah,
right?
nice.
And it was like, these kids didn't know where an egg came from. When they saw a chicken and you showed them a chicken and that an egg came from it, they were like, fuck you, get out of here. You're so that's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And every kid got to milk the cow kind of thing and all that stuff, right? It's the same thing with cannabis and all these things. You create a spiritual bond with this plant, and it's taking you on an educational journey, right?
Yeah.
And to grow good cannabis, it's about interpreting the needs and desires of that plant.
Well, are there countermeasures? Like I'll give you the vegetable version of this that I know, because I'm a very rudimentary grower. I started to do this a couple of years ago. And the first batch in these boxes near my place, I grew things, and then someone told me the next year, everything I was growing was legitimate, tomatoes and what have you. And someone told me that the reason I was having trouble with some of those is that because the proximity of where you had one kind of plant versus another kind of plant, and if you just put that in a different box or keep them away from each other, and then other plants are complementary, like your basil with your tomatoes is a great idea.
Yeah,
but
companion planting.
Companion planting. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a fascinating study, because they're all drawing from the earth, the same substance if you put in the same
It goes
fill.
even beyond that. Rudolf Steiner, who is considered the father of organic farming, created something called biodynamic agriculture, which takes into account all the astrological movements.
You're kidding.
And how they affect plants, because plants and insects are governed by the astrological movements of planetary bodies, right? And that is the other level of organic. Like guys who are organic, and then there's guys who are biodynamic.
Right.
And
it's like vegans that only eat vegetables. There's that kind of vegan, and then there's the other kind of vegan that won't even buy vegetables from a place that's also selling meat. So there's these levels of.
There are vegan pot people too that won't smoke pot that has been grown with an animal product.
Such as, what would be the animal product? Manure?
Manures, blood meal, bone meal, fish.
Wow. Yeah. I
So
know some
feather
vegans
meal.
that won't watch a movie. They didn't used to anyway, because the final product is on a celluloid, from
gelatin.
Yeah, from gelatin. I can't watch movies. Some people really take it to the limit. Another Eagles reference.
And human nature is a funny thing, and human beings are funny things. Human beings get confused and think that they're human doings, and a whole lot of success is created by doing less and being more.
Yeah, that's right. So you have a bit of a Spartan mindset when you're growing. I mean, tell us about when you have a lot of plants, what's the idea? Here's some simple questions, and I know they're simple because I don't know. I have no idea. What's the best distance between plants if you're going to grow a row of them? Are they right beside each other, or you have to?
Depends on the plant.
Depends on the
how
kind
much
of
space you have
Yep.
and what you're doing entirely. I mean, it's, there was what they call the law of diminishing return,
right.
right? So you plant them too close and too far apart, and at one point you don't get any more yield by making them further apart. You're not efficiently using your space,
Your
right?
space, right?
So,
Could have more plants in there, but too close together, maybe that's a problem as well.
It's also a plant that evolved in it's a colonizing plant, right? By the nature of how it grows, it produces a phenomenal amount of seed, and it'll drop 250 seeds a square foot if it grew in its normal environment, right? So it's different in that sense than a lot of plants, but it has what's known as a plant field psychology of its own. So what it does to survive and guarantee its proliferation.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's get back to. I wanted to touch on something we talked about the other day, Scott, if you will. Not that I ever planned to do this, but exactly how did you smoke a joint in prison?
Oh,
Wow.
That's a possibility, or I mean, I've seen some. I saw the movie The Green Mile, but that's not the green they were talking about.
I smoked one on my 50th
No.
birthday in there.
How did you do that? Were you breathe it into your sleeve, or how do you get away with that?
Well, first of all, you know
Oh,
that
okay.
it came in somebody's rectum.
Oh my goodness!
So you're like, oh, okay, all right. So it's very expensive, and it was more like a cigarette paper rolled in itself.
So this is once again something that would keep the vegans away, right?
Yeah.
Because it's got animal
Yeah.
product in it.
So and, we just went out on the
Rectum.
yard where there was no people around, and we sucked the thing down in about 3.5 seconds.
Wow,
And that was
amazing!
it.
That's incredible. I personally
Rectum, it
don't.
nearly killed him.
I was high for a week.
That's incredible. And did you get paranoid? I mean, sometimes people get paranoid. You're in jail smoking.
No, we were already in prison.
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't afraid of getting out.
But glass bongs, etc. You're not going to find that, right? You just have to get some paper.
No.
Did you use toilet paper or something to roll it, or
No,
are
no,
those
we had,
also?
I
Cigarette
was
papers?
in there just at the end of when they finally stopped cigarette smoking in prison.
In prison, that must have been
Yeah.
tough.
Oh, it was tough on the cigarette smokers, I'll tell you. There were
Yeah.
some grumpy people for a while.
That's unreal.
And I think Scott,
Well,
like I was in after you were out for a long time, huh, Scott?
Yeah. And, just to tie Paul and I together a little closer, the first joint that I smoked in prison proper, I smoked a few in jail. So when I got to prison, I said to myself, I am going to get out of this place. I'm not going to get in any trouble while I'm here. Famous last words.
Sure.
But anyway, all the affirmations that you say to yourself when you're going into a new scary place. And I met somebody in the law library who Paul knew back in the very early 70s.
Oh wow.
Yes, I've heard that. And he and I became friends through my having to defend my personal property. We talk about Tesla lying, so I had all of my personal property seized out of my driveway, and had my desk drawers, and I had to, in the course of about 3 years, defend that property and finally get it back. And this fella was the clerk in the law library, and he helped me immensely. And one evening, we were out in the yard. It was about 9 o'clock. I had a phone call scheduled for about 10 after 9. And he came up and said, "Hey, you want to smoke a joint?" And my normal reaction to that question was, "No, I'm in jail." But in this particular situation, I said, "Well, sure." So we went out in the yard and we laid down on the grass and we smoked some grass and we were contemplating the stars above. And he says, "You're from Laguna Beach, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You must know Fareed." Now, there's a name that Paul probably remembers.
Fareed?
That's a pseudonym for anybody who's going to try to Google this guy. That's
Yeah,
a pseudonym.
forget it.
We all know who it is.
Okay.
But, Fareed. And I said, I do know Kareeb. And he said, "Then you must know Paul Hartmann." And I said, I said, not only do I know Paul Hartmann, exactly 10 minutes, I am calling Paul Hartmann.
Right. And that was a
And,
vast
that's
friendship.
How we all,
Yeah.
So,
that was
Nelson
a fast
Merrill.
friend, and,
So you got out of
That moved.
you were
Yeah.
released at different times from incarceration at different points in time?
Yes, we were decades apart in that sense. I didn't.
all three of us.
Yeah. Well, Nelson went back another time, didn't he?
He did, and I just recently ran into him at the Emerald.
You ran into him somewhere.
At the Emerald Cup.
Oh,
Wow.
at the, wow.
At the
Nelson
Emerald
was I have another very good friend who I actually met Nelson through a guy named Nels Fredrickson in Santa Barbara, who was one of the people who coached me through my cancer thing. He had another true cannabis connoisseur, and Nelson was a friend of his, and Nelson grew. The favorite thing that he grew was SK1, which is a three-way hybrid of a Colombian, a Mexican strain, and an indica. That
Sounds powerful.
Well, not powerful so much as only had a 12 to 15% THC in it, but the Colombian mixture in it gave it this flavor signature that was just crazy. And you could smoke it all day long, and the taste was just incredible, right? And it became
oranges.
Yeah, it had this chunky orange fruit to it and a flavor which was reminiscent of the same kind of thing that happened with Thai when it got cured. And I would just drool to get this guy's SK1. I would go and buy it from this guy for stash.
Yeah.
Right? And then I started growing it, and Scott used to call me up, and at the end of the season, and in 1 year he calls me up and he goes, "Is the desert spice ready?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about, Scott." And he's going, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Is the desert spice ready?" I'm like, "Okay." And then I realized he was talking about the SK1.
Right.
Because I could grow it to a level of maturity down there in 12% humidity that you couldn't in Northern California, right? So
it's too cool up there.
It turned out just insane. And Scott would actually get it to have as his own stash up in Mendocino. It's like taking, what is it? You're taking Muslims to Mecca or something, right?
Now we steer the conversation
Smuggling
to hashish.
sand to the beach.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you about growing. Okay, I'm gonna put some growing questions to you, and I'll say that a few years ago, when I was just coming out of my horror of all of 2013, and then turning around, getting better from 13 into 14, I came across this concept of a grow box, and there are various different grow boxes available that claim to take a lot of the guesswork out of growing these pre-assembled grow boxes. You have to, of course, start with a good seed, obviously, and it's a lot easier to do that. What's your opinion on grow boxes, and specifically when they're small cabinets such as this? The recommendation is to take an auto-flowering plant. So tell us a little bit about what you think about that, and what auto-flowering is compared to, I guess, normal flowering, and what your thoughts are on the viability and quality of these items.
So auto-flowering plants, we'll start with that one. Those have been bred specifically to produce female plants. If you force a female plant to produce a male flower by altering the night cycle, in other words, introducing light during the night cycle periodically throughout the night cycle, the plant will, it stresses the plant out enough to cause it to express male flowers. Now, the difference between a female flower and a male flower that's been produced using that stress technique is that male flower is not a gene that will produce another male flower. So those seeds will come out about 99% female. When you take those plants and you put those into a situation like 12-12 normally, 12 hours of light or 12 hours of darkness, they'll flower instantly. If you put them in a situation where they're getting, say, 18 hours of light and 6 hours of dark, they'll still flower. Now, most cannabis will only flower if you reduce the light cycle down to 12 hours as a stress response. So just imagine a plant growing in nature. How does it know when the season is coming to a close? In equatorial climates, it doesn't know, so it has to be genetically predisposed to produce flowers.
Wow.
So the stress response is an age, but it's built in by age. When you start moving away from the equator, and you start getting into situations where there is a day-night cycle that changes through the season, those plants are going to depend on the night cycle to trigger the flowering. So the longer the night cycle, the oncoming of the flower. So you can genetically trick a strain to produce all female and to flower under 12 hours. In a grow box, that's almost critical because you don't have a whole lot of space, and you don't want to get into that diminishing return. You don't want a 6-foot plant in a 5-foot grow box, now do you?
No.
So you really want to work with strains that are going to flower automatically and are going to flower when they're very, very small.
That's incredible. So it's not just about the seed. There's so much more going on. Wow. I was not led to believe that by these folks that wanted to sell me a cabinet. But, yeah, I can understand that's going to get all over the map. Yeah. So let's do you have any recommendations for someone to use a grow cabinet, or you're just like a forest kind of guy? You just want it to grow as large as you can. Do you think that's a wise way to start? And I mean, it's kind of expensive to get one, so I wouldn't want to recommend it if it's ultimately not a good deal.
Well, if you've got a small space and you're working, like if you want to try to grow a few medicinal plants in your apartment, and you've only got a small space to work in, and you don't necessarily want to put a grow light in the middle of your living room, and you don't want to convert your bedroom into a grow house, it actually makes some sense, and that is actually a really, I think it's a good alternative. When you start to move into places like where I live, like last year, we grew 10,000 square feet of canopy. A grow box wouldn't have been very helpful to us.
Right.
But if you're going to do like very specific genetic work, when you don't want other genes to get involved, you set up a grow box with a good filter, and male pollen can't get in there. And then you can be very specific about what males you use on the females that you've got locked in your box. Or you can put your males in there and keep them away from your females, kind of like Catholic school, or some of these other places where all girls schools or all boys schools. You can set that up in a grow box, but you can't do that in nature. That's very difficult.
Okay, so how do we get started? Where would you recommend getting a seed or seeds, and how many? Like, this is a small time operation. Let's say in Canada, for example. Whatever the laws are, it's just a dog's breakfast of ridiculous nonsense so far, and there'll be all kinds of tinkering and subsequent lawsuits later, unfortunately. But what would you tell the person who wants to grow their legally allotted 4 plants, medical growers and perhaps, I don't know if it's personal use kind of folks or not. It disappoints me, the whole legislation, and right now it slipped my mind. But for the medical grower that's legally allowed to plant 4 plants only, according to the law, and they want to try that and be according to the law, what would you recommend to do in your home? I mean, not everybody has access to a Southern California, the equivalent of a vineyard, to grow their cannabis. So how would you start off in that place? There's going to be thousands of people that are in this position.
If you can't get a cutting, a clone, call it, but it's not really a clone. It's an asexual reproduction of another plant. So it's a cutting off of another plant. If you can't get one of those that already has a stabilized genetics and a known outcome, it's going to take a little bit of work. You're going to want to get seeds from a reputable seed supplier. The bag of weed that you just bought, probably not a good place to start. But some of the best strains in the world have been found in a bag. So, it's for the novice, if you don't want to spend a whole lot of time, what they call hunting through your genetics, the best thing to do is to try to find an already living cutting. Otherwise, the next step is to sprout your seeds, to determine which ones are males, remove the males, grow the females out, and then determine which one of those females is the one.
Gosh.
If you like it, then you can go back, get more seeds, and start the hunt again. And this is the unfortunate thing with a 4-plant limit, is that it's a really difficult thing to do, to strain hunt with 4 plants.
Yeah.
Just,
now, I could grow my 4 plants. I could put my 4 seeds in there, and it turns out after the germination process, and I identify all of them as male, perhaps. And I got to start over again, right?
That's true. That is absolutely true. I mean, I know somebody who's working on a stabilization project for an Afghan landrace strain.
Oh, boy.
They sprouted 18,000 seeds to get the one cutting.
Wow. Yeah, so that's why people want to be able to access medical cannabis, because you're not going to just plant 4 plants. You're literally a greenhorn yourself as a grower, and you're going to get 4 plants going. They're all going to be fantastic. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean...
and it may. It may. But I wouldn't want to discourage anybody from trying, because, going back to what Paul said about the wisdom that the plant can impart, just by kind of an osmotic absorption of wisdom. That plant is a very smart plant. That plant has been around and around, has been around for thousands of years, and it's grown side by side with humanity. As a matter of fact, I don't think we would be here today, for sure not having this conversation, if it weren't for the plant.
Oh, I wouldn't be, that's for sure. I don't think Paul...
No kidding, eh?
Yeah.
We definitely wouldn't.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to do is discourage people from taking the journey.
Oh, me too. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying...
If you've got a medical condition...
I'm just giving you the heads up,
if
folks.
If you've got a medical condition and you're... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying I don't want to. If I gave the impression I don't think you should do it, or I don't want you to do it, I'm making sure that I'm changing that perception right now. I'm just saying it may not be as easy, particularly for folks that don't know, like myself. You go get a plant, 4 pots, away you go, and it's all good. It's not necessarily going to go like that, but that should not discourage you from cultivating and learning how.
Exactly. I mean, it's such a learning process, and you got to start somewhere. It's one foot in front of the other. I mean, I'm always amazed at what people perceive in different stages. It's like learning how to water properly is always such a hard thing for some people to learn.
Too much, not enough.
Too much, not enough. And the guys who are too little don't see any results, and sometimes the people who put too much on see results, right? But these hybrids are also sensitive to funguses that. And we're living in a sea of F1 hybrids and F2 hybrids that people have created with fungus sensitivities. So it's...
On that note about the plants being intelligent and being around for such a long time, as you say, and that cannabis has been working and growing side by side humanity for as long as we've been here, and probably longer. Are you familiar at all with the man named Cleve Backster?
I'm not.
You're not? Okay, well, let me lay this on you. I read this book a long time ago, well before I made the connection of cannabis, etc. But this gentleman was, he fancied himself able to tell when people were lying. And he started to get into hypno and narco interrogation practices to be able to tell if people were lying, and he would administer polygraph tests, etc. And he was teaching the cops in New York City and FBI agents how to be able to use the techniques that he was developing. And he became a bit of a law enforcement legend, and as it's written up in New York Times Magazine, he's got a book out called The Secret Life of Plants. This book is approximately 50 years old. And what he was able to do eventually is that he noticed that when he would threaten a plant with either cutting it apart or burning it, that the plant he had hooked up to a machine that he had devised, or parts and bits of another machine, and he could threaten the plant, and the plant would register signals as you would if you were telling a lie on a lie detector test. And when things were going well and he was complimentary and caring for the plants would emit a positive signal as determined by his machinery. And he got into some crazy experiments, like he'd have a bunch of plants in a room, different kinds of plants, and he would be really mean and rude and threatening to some of the plants, and very loving and caring of the other plants. And sure enough, the ones that were being mistreated deliberately for the purposes of the experiment would fall off. They wouldn't grow as well. They would develop diseases. The other ones were flourishing. And then you get this whole thing about old ladies talking to plants and how nuts are they, which was also a misnomer, because apparently it's quite effective. And the further back you go into the pure plants, such as your Colombian golds, etc., it fascinates me that, while you're growing, don't take that notion of caring for and loving. You are caring. You are a caretaker at that point. And I recommend this book to anybody. It doesn't get specifically into cannabis because of the times it was written, etc. But this guy can also attests, let me just take one more minute on this, that while he was sending messages, he said, to plants, such as he could be on the other side of the world. He could be in England, and his plants could have been somewhere in the United States of America. And as soon as he would think, I know this is nuts, folks, but I mean, this is what the data shows, and this is the kind of thing they don't teach in the mainstream. But as soon as he would think, something like, fuck you, plant, as soon as I get back, I'm going to kill you, he had it hooked up to machines, and he would get that fluctuation instantly, from 7, 8, 10, 15 hours away on the different side of the planet, because it's not about, a lot like a tin can and a string or this kind of technology where you have these gaps. The plant would just sense that right away. And he continued to do this till he got to the point where he had all kinds of techniques and methodologies to bring this to light. And it's so sad to have read this book about for myself 25 years ago, and there's very little development on this awareness. These are sentient beings, and as I say, as a banner on my show, a plant can save your life. So worth checking out, The Secret Life of Plants.
Well, it goes back to the physics
Can't
thing.
fool Mother Nature.
Yeah, it's amazing. What's that, Paul?
It goes back to the physics thing where there is no empty space, right?
Right.
So when you make that expression, it's felt because the connection between that person and the plant isn't broken.
That's it.
It's just distance. There's atoms between you and them making that connection. This is an empty space, right?
Or so it seems.
It's solid space.
Yeah. And Masaru Emoto with this same kinds of studies on water, like telling a glass of water to go fuck itself, and I'm gonna pour you onto some paint and mix you up into some shit, and then it changes its molecular structure, and they look at it under a magnifying glass, and if you abuse a glass of water, and then you measure this under a microscope, take a look at it under a microscope, it looks all damaged and burnt, like the kind of snow that melts when the all the dirt falls down on it and everything. And then if you praise it and thank it and express gratitude and kindness and consideration, it looks like a beautiful snowflake. It's incredible.
It's frequency.
Yeah.
Right. You're using frequency. An expression of love is an energy vibration.
Right.
Is an energy vibration that is transcendable. You can send it, right? Like when you tell somebody over the phone you love them and they feel it, it's because they actually are feeling it. It's not.
Yeah. That's incredible. So take that into account, everybody that's growing, while you're getting into the science of it as well. I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah, there's
There we go.
There's an old saying, and that's the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow.
Huh.
In other words, the more time you spend, the better outcome you'll have, and the more open you are to the messages the plant's going to send you. The better chance you have of receiving those messages and either acting appropriately or knowing when the right time to not act. Don't jerk the wheel. What you guys were talking about, I think, is very interesting. That empty space. I heard the philosophy that we all have a brain, and the brain is our individual kind of analysis tool. But the mind lives between us. The mind is when our two brains are communicating, and that's kind of that empty space. And I don't think that has. There's no time in that space. That space is not affected by time. It's a collapsed time-space continuum. And so a plant knows, without having to know, your intent without you having to express it.
Right. There were trees near where I was living for a long time, and one year I would walk by them, and they were perched on the edge of Lake Ontario. And one year I walked, it was probably 2010 or something, and maple trees, which I'm quite familiar with as a Canadian, and these things had these black warts, all like fully coming off of the leaf, like the size of almost a half, like a, what would it be like? The size of an entire ant, a large ant, or maybe even larger than that, just festered all over these trees. And I remember being so upset by this because I didn't know what it was. And it's these lovely trees, and you could tell they were going to come down, and not much I could do about that, right? They were just growing in the sort of municipal park area. And then the next year, all that stuff was gone. There must have been 20, 30 of these trees had this awful stuff on their leaves. And then I guess one cycle of dropping them brown on the ground and reflowering, they were fine again. And there was nobody out there doing any kind of maintenance. They're just natural trees out there. And I liked that turned around. It seemed like to me they were all going to rot and fall into the lake, but they seemed to be fantastic after that, and they still are.
It's constant evolution out there, I mean, the plants go through cyclic things all the time. We look at these long-term weather patterns that we're in, and who's to say that this didn't happen 10 million years ago, the same kind of cycle we're in now.
Oh, you mean the temperature warming, global warming, all that stuff?
Global warming, yeah.
Because we're only looking at it on a couple thousand years.
That's right. We're a blink, right? We're 80 years in the scheme of 10 million,
But all science says that it's all mankind doing this. That's what they say. The science is in, and we know that's what it is. And I guess there's a possibility that's not necessarily also the case, huh? So,
well, the absolutism is not. I don't think that there's an absolute there, but I do believe that human. We're currently producing a heck of a lot of carbon for our normal behavior. That's going all the way up into the absolutely correct. That correction may be very painful for humanity, but it'll correct.
Right.
And when it does, we'll all be unfortunately in the ground. I'm assuming, but or somewhere in between. I did an energy study with a Nobel laureate, Dr. Evan Mills, and we looked at when we talk about these grow tents and these these indoor grow operations, and we looked at what the potential sustainability might be of everybody growing their cannabis indoors, because a lot of the legislation forces people to have to grow indoors.
Absolutely.
I know up in Canada that's a big problem for them. And when we looked at that, we looked at the amount of cannabis that is normally consumed, and we looked at medical versus adult use and everything in between, we came to the conclusion that if everybody had to grow all of their cannabis indoors, we would be in some serious environmental trouble. Whether we're responsible for 100% of it or not, we would certainly be contributing negatively to the carbon load that it needs to get scrubbed out by plants. And that's exactly what plants are doing right now, is they're scrubbing all of that carbon out of the atmosphere, and through its own biomass, its own system of decomposition, it puts the carbon where it belongs, back in the soil, reabsorbed by plants. But when it's floating around up in the atmosphere, not so good. And the average, now we're going to talk about an average, the average pound of indoor-grown cannabis costs 4,200 pounds of carbon that goes up into the atmosphere.
Wow.
That's not a sustainable model. So 4,200.
Give me those numbers again.
If anybody wants to look, it's 4,200 pounds of carbon are produced for 1 pound of indoor-grown cannabis.
And that is approximately one plant, is it not? One full-grown plant is about a pound once you dry it out?
On an indoor, well, grow, you're probably going to get maybe, 4 to 8 ounces off of an indoor-grown plant. Now, that's a plant that's probably going to take up about 10 square feet, about 5 feet by 5 feet.
Okay, so along with the military structure and the financial structure, you're also saying that proliferate indoor growing is going to be unsustainable, and we Canadians are going to be causing a lot of that up here.
Well, I mean, that's what I said in the beginning, was that you got these huge mega grows that are all based on Harper's version of the law, it all having to be indoors, and it's not a sustainable practice.
Wow.
So you've got these companies have gone public and taken in millions, tens of millions, some of them hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
And when the market crashes up here, like it did in California, we're going to see some of these big guys go under.
Yikes.
Happening right now.
It's happening right now in California. Tell us about give us a bird's eye view of what's going on. I read this very same thing that Paul was talking about is already going on in California. A lot of grow ops. Now, we just turned legal down there, right? January 1 was a different series of law structures for you in California, but now you would think everyone's flourishing, but they're down there going through a lot of troubles. Can you tell us about that?
I can. Well, California, when we did our energy study, we were able to access quite a bit of data. My partner in the study, who was working at Lawrenceburg National Labs at the time, so we had access to massive amounts of data. And what he came up with was that, California is a producer state. We have 300 days of the year of sunshine.
Yeah, rub it in.
So we produce most of the food for the United States. We produce massive amounts of textiles. We're a producer state. We're the 6th largest economy in the world. California in 2011, when we did our energy study, was producing about 60, maybe 65% of all the cannabis consumed in the United States. Wow. It's all coming out of California. And then possibly quite a bit that was, in Canada and other places too. But what happened was, as each state, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, each state comes online with their own policy of acceptable self-growing, it reduces the market share that California had. Come Prop 64, which was 1/1/2018, we voted on it in 2017, and it was enacted in 2018, which allowed adults or adult-like people who have had enough birthdays, to grow their own cannabis for whatever reason. And that further reduced the consumption of cannabis. You'd think that it wouldn't, but it actually did. Fewer people are actually smoking cannabis now than were 15 or 20 years ago.
Right.
Scratch your head on that one for a moment.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden California is the producer state. It has fewer consumers in California, and it's got fewer consumers across the board, which is illegal anyway. We produced in 2017 an estimated 2-year supply of cannabis. So if you know what that does, as Paul said early in the conversation, that cannabis is going to become a commodity. Well, cannabis is very rapidly becoming a commodity. So last year at this time, the price of the street price of cannabis hasn't changed much, but the wholesale price of cannabis in California went from about $1,800 a pound for very high quality outdoor grown cannabis Right now, it's sitting at about $380 a pound.
Wow. $380 a pound.
God, I miss California.
Here's a guy that knows what he's talking about. Scott Zeramby from Mendocino Agricultural Products and Dirt Cheap Landscape and Garden Supply. Why is it so dirt cheap? What are you doing?
Well, you know, may not necessarily be the best economic model. I think scarcity actually is where you get your best dollar. But you know, the absence of you know, going back to why people grow and how people grow and what the benefits are. You know, I think that, you know, from a medical model, we've really kind of twisted up what disease is and what health is.
Absolutely.
And we think that medicine is the treatment of a disease. And I think medicine is the prevention of a disease. You know, the consumers of cannabis have naturally been more healthy than the non-consumers.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that magic? You know, well, that really puts a little hitch in the pharmaceutical companies' get along. They don't like that.
Yeah.
They would rather see a disease to treat. They've got drugs for all these things. They got a pill for that. They got a pill for your fear of having a pill for that. So they don't want to see you take control of your absence of your presence of health.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenging situation for all of us. So when they call it an adult use, I think all cannabis consumption is medical.
I agree. I totally agree. And if you do it recreationally enough, you're buffering yourself to the point where you might not need medical intervention. Well, listen, we're coming up near to the end of our time, unfortunately. I want to ask you a specific question. It turns out that our previous guest on the show, Barry Foy, one of the gentlemen smugglers, these guys were on the East Coast while you guys were on the West Coast. In the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, we're bringing in cannabis from... just at the beginning, a very few places, and before all of this genetic proliferation, they were having Acapulco gold, Colombian gold, and Panama red. So, can we talk about those? Is that almost a land race, the Colombian strain and the and also the Acapulco gold? What's the difference between Acapulco gold and Colombian?
Everything
gold?
Was land race back then.
Yeah, sure. So what was so great about it? I enjoyed having it, and I had some last year, and I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed that.
They were strong foundation strains that, you know, the genetic heritage of those varieties went back hundreds, maybe longer years, you know. They were just good, hardy strains that were locally produced. In Panama Red, you remember, Panama was Colombia before it became Panama.
Right.
They kind of stole the country and the canal from Colombia, right?
Wow.
So those strains came from there, and the Mexican strains were closely related, but could have more African genes in them. You know, we're not sure how they got to the New World or if they originated there. You know,
right?
Our knowledge of those strains and their foundation nature is different. You know, we don't look at how when Cortez came to the New World and Pizarro and Marco Polo and those guys took seeds from the New World. They took them to Asia and Europe and India. Tomatoes and hot peppers didn't exist in those places until after the Spanish had come to the New World. Same with potatoes, right? So what cannabises came from China to here and vice versa, India, things like that, we've kind of lost in the cloud, you know?
That's too bad. I don't seem to be able to find Colombian gold. Like I said, I had a bit at a dispensary last year. They were selling some. It was there for a short period of time, and then it wasn't there anymore.
SK1's the closest thing you can get to it probably anymore. That's
SK1.
Pure. Although I'm betting strain hunters, those guys probably have some stashed away or something.
Oh, but yeah, those guys.
Look at Arjan. Those guys at Greenhouse Seeds are really pioneering. Going back to these original land races and trying to unlock the secrets in that genetics and how those were, you know, able to survive so many millennia, in their own nature.
Yeah, the Acapulco Gold is here, one of the best strains in the world, and so old. I mean, if you remember Cheech and Chong albums, Acapulco Gold, man.
But that's regional names, right?
Sure.
That strain, who knows where it came from? It was just grown in Acapulco, and
so you can never really get locked in on a fantastic seed that you want to cultivate and grow yourself. I mean, how do you? Because we got to wrap it up soon. So how can you best tell the folks who don't know anything, including myself, what are the top 3-5 things I need to do to get started right now to try and get this going? Both of you guys.
Boy, it's so hard. There's so many different strains now,
Yeah.
But you look for something that finishes early up here for sure in Canada and is mold resistant. And similarly, so for West Coast people in Mendocino have to deal with a mold issue too.
Right.
Scotty, what do you guys grow out there?
Right now, we're looking at a lot of the sativas. We've got a great the Mendocino pineapple, and it produces a flower that is just extraordinary. The smell of it doesn't even smell like what you would think cannabis smells like. It doesn't have any of that fury, skunky. It's just pure sweet fruit. And it's coming in at about 21% THC. So it's a very high THC strain. It's an equatorial sativa, so very long leaves, and it resists mold. So think about fat leaves have more surface area to collect condensation, which leads to mold. Thin leaves, so looking at sativas, early finishing sativas is what I would recommend folks look at, particularly for their first grows. They tend to grow a little bigger. You get a little higher yield. They might be a little lower in the THC, but they're easier to.
Okay, and it's always important, and this is tough in Canada. Not only the heat, but the light. You can't just grow them in a box all the time and not have the lights on. What can you tell us about light deprivation? That's a specific question coming in from one of the listeners.
Well, light dep is really manipulating the day-night cycle in an area that doesn't have. So, light deprivation is simply cutting off the light early. So if you can cause your plants to flower multiple, not the same plant, but you can have multiple crops in the same year by, even if you have 18 hours of outdoor sunshine, you just pull a tarp over your greenhouse so you can block out 100%. If you introduce light during the dark cycle, so if there's a little stab of light coming in, that flower alone is probably going to produce a male flower that will produce seeds, which is not really ideal.
Yeah, of course.
Particularly if you've only got a small amount of space. So light deprivation is just some system of shutting off the light at 12 hours.
Okay. And then you can further manipulate and control by then. I'm going to manipulate you, Scott, and say goodbye to you. We'll have you back on sometime, and hopefully you'll have something we can do a little bit more advanced than a Gilligan Island coconut phone or whatever we're doing here. It's been a bit rough, but the first front end of it was a little bit difficult. So it's great Paul was here to kind of sub in and pick up. But you've been sounding great for the last hour or so. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll make sure Paul gets home safely.
Thanks a lot, Scotty.
And it was great talking to you.
Much love to you up there in Canada land. Peace.
Love you, brother.
All right, stay green and stay lean. We'll talk to you later. That's Scott Zeramby, and he is from the Mendocino growing situation down there's a little theme song for you, Sting, to get out of there. So now we do have one more question I want to get to before we say goodbye.
A closing question.
A closing question, as it is. Okay, so Paul, we started talking about this particular strain a while ago with the gentleman smugglers there, and I would just like to understand that you went to Colombia. Is that right? Colombia.
Yes.
And you showed them. You showed them how to grow better. What was that all about? How did that go?
I had gone to Colombia just to get seeds, and to Cartagena, and I had a rather bad experience, though, as soon as I got there. I traveled as a photographer, a fashion and travel photographer, wherever I went. And so I always had camera equipment with me. And so I get to Bogota, and I had to lay over there for a day, and then I was going to Cartagena. And I walk out of the airport, and I set my camera case right down next to my leg, and the next thing I know, it's running down the street.
Oh, no.
And I had about $50,000 worth of Leica camera equipment in the case, and I went running after this kid, and he dropped it before I got near him, but I almost got arrested. Like, I had to buy my way out of a situation with the police.
Really?
Yeah.
You had to buy your way out.
Buy my way out to get my camera case back, and then I went to Cartagena the next day and went out into the mountains and looked at some landrace strains of Colombian that these guys were growing, and collected seed, and brought it back with me to Mexico and grew it there.
Wow, that's amazing. And then so they took your advice. You learned a couple of things too. I'm sure you must.
It was at that stage where people still were making the transition to sensimilla, to seedless cannabis, right? So it was just quick stuff like that. Their strain, the great thing about the Colombian variety was that it was so resistant to just about every problem you could have in a tropical environment.
Right.
And everything in the tropics wants to eat everything else. So it's there's so much biodiversity and life in a spot like that I mean, plants get beat up by bugs.
Wow.
So you got to have something that's resistant.
That's not so great.
Yeah.
Plants beat up by bugs.
Yep.
Well, that's not a good thing. We're going to have to get going. We are definitely out of time, but I just want to give a plug to cannabisdaily.co. Been some great people down there helping us out. And check out cannabisdaily.co online. It's Cannabis with a Z for our Americans and our Z for our more British-based colonials. They've got a fantastic thing out now. It's a free ebook. You didn't want to hear that. It's a free ebook called The Lesser Known Benefits of Cannabis. And you can download that right now. It's a lot of cool things. There's about 5 pages there. It says it makes prescription drugs cheaper because you're going to be using less of them. It's much more effective than a lot of medicines for a lot of different things because it doesn't really attack the disease. It renders you... what the hell is that noise? It renders you impervious to disease. So that's why it works on so many different things. It's a nice-looking form here. It can help improve your lung capacity. I know this is counterintuitive to a lot of the mainstream folks, and it also helps lessen alcohol consumption. And maybe if you weren't so rippled and pickled in the head, you wouldn't be dreaming up Canada's new legalized cannabis legislation, would you, Bill? It can also heat things up in the bedroom. So that's a cool thing to do if you've ever... partaken of it. So check that out at cannabisdaily.co. And did you want to say anything or make a plug or anything? Let's plug Sam's book.
We got to plug Sam's book for sure. Yeah. Dr. Sam's book, The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. If you haven't bought it, get it. It's all going to a good cause, to a great man. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for guys like Sam Malachi. Putting his money where his mouth is for decades here in Canada. Yeah,
The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. Definitely check that out. It's a great book, and it'll teach you a lot of things. And for me, it confirmed a lot of things that I thought were nutty ideas that I had that I didn't really feel comfortable articulating, and he's all laid it all out there for us.
Yes, you can feel a bit insane at times, and then you realize, have I just been a sucker all these years, or what?
Yeah, been fooled by the man. So before we go, let's get this thing out of here. I don't know what's going on.
You know what else we got to do is we got to show our solidarity to our brothers and sisters in Australia. Jenny Hallam
Absolutely.
and Tony Bauer, and who was the other gentleman who was making stuff for his daughters, and they're after him down there too.
Yeah. Criminals, they're branded.
Yeah, branded criminals. These people need our love and support all around the world. There are cannabis activists that are being persecuted, and we stand solid with our Australian brothers and sisters for sure.
Absolutely. So we're there with you, and we'll do our best to try to spread the word. Congratulations again to Vera Toomey. Check her out. She's on the Green Crush page, just pouring her heart out in gratitude to so many people that got behind her efforts, and she is a true champion as well.
Yeah,
and
Jane Drow, that was a great one.
Yeah, she was on last week. Same thing. Oh, you've got multiple sclerosis, do you? Well, you really want to check cannabis out as a regular life improvement agent.
Indeed.
And maybe get into a whole different life you hadn't even believed would be possible. So on behalf of Paul Hartmann, and he can also say goodbye his own self. I just want to say thank you for everybody coming on, and I hope to see you again on the show next week. Ooh.
Awesome. Good night, Alan.
This is Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, and we're not going to stop until everybody gets to understand how great this substance really is. Signing off.
Be a part of the Green Crush.